Tonight, we journey into the story of China. You move across lowest plains that glow like pale wheat, and through tea-green valleys where low clouds cling to pine and stone. Courtyards breathe cedar smoke, roof tiles shine with the last memory of rain. Pagodas rise like quiet prayers, and arched bridges hold still above water that carries the echo of old footsteps. Temple bells release a silver hush into the evening air. You might struggle to endure what they once lived through. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin at daybreak where two giants write the map. The Yellow River moves with a restless heart, thick with silt that stains its banks the color of grain, while the Yangtze glides with slow assurance, carrying the breath of far mountains toward the sea. Along the northern river, early homes rise from packed earth. Walls are tamped until they harden like a promise. Reeds cut at the waterline are woven into roofs that rustle when the breeze arrives. Pots dry on mats under a thin sun, warm to the touch. Children run in circles, laughing at dogs that nose the powdery dust. At a bend later called Banpo, round houses gather around a common floor that is swept each morning until it shows the gentle shine of use. A shallow ditch rings the settlement and keeps storm rain from invading the fire pits. Painted pottery shows fishes and flowing lines. Small fingers follow those lines and learn how to steady the hand. This is something the soil keeps faithfully. The ground still holds the imprint of houses and hearths and jars, and the quiet order that held them together. You cross that ground and feel how a world begins, not with a proclamation, but with a way of arranging life so that peace has a place to sit. You follow water south and the air changes. Wetlands breathe and reeds murmur against one another. Timber posts lift homes above tender earth. Rice hangs in bundles, a clean sweetness settling into the afternoon shade where people rest their backs and listen to the slow drip of rinsed grain. Paddles touch boat sides with a soft knock and the sound travels along channels that branch like veins from a heart. Smoke climbs in blue threads from cooking fires. A girl carries a gourd of water and the drops that fall from the rim shine like small scales in the light. People meet this land with patience, and patience ripens into custom. Grain grinders hum with a circular rhythm that seems to calm the mind while it feeds the body. Millet fills jars sealed with straw and clay. In the south, rice settles into its basin as if returning home, and families measure the year by flood and planting and harvest and the quiet wait between them. Hands remember the motion of tying bundles. Backs remember the weight of baskets. Neighbors pass tools rather than words. Where the earth is gentle, sharing comes easily. Where water is fierce, the village gathers again around the common floor, counting what was saved and what must be rebuilt. The river sometimes refuses every plan. When the Yellow River swells and turns heavy and loud, banks crumble and fields vanish beneath moving water. In the night the sound is one long note older than language. Families climb the nearest rise and hold lamps close. Flames bow to the wind and waver against faces that do not flinch. Morning shows a plain wiped smooth. The path that led to the well has been erased. Yet the river leaves a new skin of rich silt, and with it the lesson that order must be earned again. Work begins with quieter voices and deeper resolve. Floods carry loss, and they also write tomorrow's fertility into the land. In a courtyard away from the floodplain, someone turns a small green stone in the palm. It is cool and soft to the eye, as if it keeps a measure of river within its light. A cord is threaded through a drilled hole and the stone rests against the chest. No speech explains the meaning. The gesture is enough. Beauty is a duty, and what endures should be kept near. Later ages will shape such stone into discs and tubes with careful polish, but here a single smooth pebble is already a teacher of reverence. Sometimes the ground offers more than bowls and beads. West of the river, a broad platform rises in terraces of rammed earth. You walk a straight way that once led to a gate, now only a faint line in the soil. Storage pits lie quiet. Rooms once lay in measured order. Many hands served a will that has lost its name. No inscription waits to tell you whose it was. You stand at the edge of remembering and feel the presence of a court that might be the seat of the first kings remembered in later stories, or a different house entirely that time chose to fold back into silence. The earth keeps its counsel and invites you to listen without forcing an answer. Evenings come with a rhythm that steadies the mind. Millet porridge warms the hands that hold the bowls. Fish stews until it turns tender, and steam carries the scent of river and smoke and a wild leaf gathered along the path. A flute finds 3 notes and lets them linger. Children drift to sleep on woven mats. Elders sit with backs straight and voices low, and a clay tablet carved with a simple mark rests near the door so the house can remember its own name. From such quiet moments rituals grow, and from ritual grows a way of walking that keeps the village whole. The early light of this beginning teaches measure. The river teaches boundary and the field teaches patience. Your hand runs along a wall and feels the straw within the earth, a binding stronger than it looks. Your palm comes away powdered and cool. The wall is shelter and record. It keeps yesterday from washing away and trusts tomorrow to arrive. People look up and trace the paths of stars, then look down and match those paths with furrows and irrigation lines. Grain follows season. Houses follow wind. Duties follow age and kin. The lesson settles without hurry. Stories gather when the day's labor has ended. Some tell of a great tamer of floods who opened channels and persuaded the water to respect its course. Some tell of a long creature that coils in the mud and raises new banks with the turning of its body. You keep both pictures without forcing a choice. One is the memory of cooperative work. The other is a shape for awe and fear. Along the thin line between them, a people learn to walk with dignity, honoring the river in themselves. Night deepens and the sky opens a cold garden. You lie near the water and count what repeats. Frogs answer one another from bank to bank. A wooden wheel dips and lifts, dip and lift, and the trickle it makes falls into a channel with a note like glass. Far away a dog gives a short bark, then chooses silence. The world settles. You understand how a civilization can begin with a decision to stay. Stay through flood and winter wind. Stay through lean years and the labor of rebuilding. Stay until habit becomes craft and craft becomes tradition. You let the rivers breathe for you. In that breathing you feel the first thread of a pattern that will pass through palaces and poems and roads that climb the hills where witchfires glow. The thread begins here in the hush of silt and in the warmth of a bowl passed from hand to hand. It begins with attention that does not tire. It begins with respect for what is older than any one life and with the quiet courage to set another stone tomorrow. You rise from the river villages and enter a valley of drums and bronze. Night cools a northern plain where foundations sleep beneath fields of millet. A scribe smooths a turtle shell with patient hands. He cuts thin strokes that catch lamplight, then warms the shell until a crack spreads like a dry branch. The room holds its breath. Meaning travels along the line and a reader speaks for a house. The court is a measured world. Platforms of packed earth rise in terraces, each a stage for duty. Bronze tripods stand in ranks. Their bellies shine where cloth has polished them. In recessed lines, a clever hand-shaped masks that stare without blinking. A ladle lifts clear liquor to the rim of a vessel. Steam rises from bowls of meat and millet. You touch a bronze and feel chill give way to warmth. Ore left a far hill and fire made it flow. Clay held a pattern and the pattern became a creature of loops and steady eyes. Some say the creature is a guardian that eats harm before it reaches the bowl. Others say it is hunger itself, a reminder to feed what cannot be seen. The mask is silent and the silence steadies the hands that pour. The city breathes with order. Chariots wait near the gate. Axles receive oil. Horses stamp as if they remember a wide grassland beyond the farms. A bell strikes a single note that travels along the avenue. Scribes bend to their work. Bone and shell and slips of bamboo gather the marks of speech. A script grows that lets a thought travel more faithfully than memory. Ancestral halls glow with a deeper light. Wooden tablets breathe the names of those who once sustained the line. Bowls of grain rest before them. A cup darkens with a drop of wine. The scent of burned spice holds in the rafters. Sleeves breathe like wings. Strings lengthen the air into sound. You feel a cord draw tight between the living and the remembered. Beyond the halls, a pit opens for a royal burial. Steps descend into a cool shadow. Boxes receive tools and mirrors and combs. Horses stand with carved masks and tassels that never tremble. Bones record that duty can ask for a last companionship that passes the gate of breath. The earth closes. The mound gathers grass and rain. Children roll down laughing. The hill keeps its quiet. The kings favor one northern seat. At a place later called Yin, they fix their rights and their law in written cracks and clean cuts. Pits there hold turtle plastrons and ox scapulae. Grooves score the surface. Hollows wait for heat. Names and dates and offerings live in those strokes. Fires touch the shells. The sound of splitting arrives like frost opening a pond at dawn. Meaning rises with the smoke. Far to the west, the light falls differently on the slopes above the Wei River. There a house sharpens its wool among fields that lean toward mountains. Horses know the passes. Elders speak of virtue as a gravity that keeps a realm from falling apart. The word for heaven takes on new weight. The word for command becomes a song that can be lost or won. The valley listens. A city wakes to the beat of feet along its eastern road. Spears glimmer in first light. The ground vibrates. The last Shang king keeps his court in embers and gold. A force from the west sets its rows beyond the walls. On the plain of Muya, the noise swells until it feels like a living creature. A line holds, then loosens, then opens like a gate. Old banners lower. Dust breathes deeper. Evening receives a new oath. A new order names its right to rule as a gift that rests on care for the people and reverence for right and measure. It withdraws when a ruler forgets the field and the granary. The phrase flows easily and the feeling behind it is harder to hold. It is a hope that power might listen to something higher than power. Lords receive lands with duties that face inward and outward. Roads reach from the heartland to cold passes and warm plains. Jade returns to the palm. Round discs lift the sky. Square tubes keep a hint of earth in their corners. A craftsman grinds the stone with sand and water until the surface takes on a soft glow that never grows loud. The work is slow. The patience is its own lesson. When the disc rests on an altar, it does not shout. It simply agrees with the room and steadies the heart. You walk a terrace where elders discuss the needs of a village that has given its sons to a distant pass. Granaries must hold through a thin winter. Irrigation channels must be cleared before the spring flood. The elders weigh duty and kindness as two sides of a single coin, then choose a path that keeps both visible. This habit spreads. It enters the music. It enters the law. The realm imagines itself as a farm tended at the edges. Stories grow around the fall of the last Shang king. Some speak of towers bright with gems and courtyards that never cooled. Some speak of a heart that forgot the fields and the households that grind the daily meal. The truth hides like a fish in silted water. Oracle cracks do not tell of private nights. Bronze masks keep their calm. The tale leaves rooms in shadow, and the shadow keeps a use that words cannot finish. Courts praise the harmony of heaven and earth as something the ruler must renew each season. Plows cut, bells ring, banners welcome brave lives and modest ones. Yet there is steel beneath the silk. Borders must be watched. Horses must be fed. Alliances must be held with care. You feel the forward pull toward clarity and order, and you also feel an undertow from memory and grief. The thread that began in silt still hums. Night draws a cool cover over the fields. You look back toward the river and the low ridgelines beyond it. Somewhere a kiln glows. Somewhere a scribe sharpens a small knife. Somewhere a child watches an elder hold a smooth green disc to the window and study how dawn lives inside stone. You hear a single cart wheel creak and then grow quiet as it reaches home. The new order sleeps with its eyes open, and you lie within its breath. You leave the terraces where elders weigh duty and kindness and step into roads that branch like brush strokes across a wide map. Town walls rise from the plains in layered earth. Watchtowers lift lanterns into the dusk. Messengers ride between gates with tablets wrapped in silk. Iron leaves the bloomery with a dark shine and enters plow and spear alike. Fields thicken with grain and armies learn to move like weather across valleys and river fords. The air feels charged with purpose, as if each province listens for a rhythm that might bring it into tune. In one court, a teacher gathers disciples under a locust tree. The light filters through compound leaves and stipples their robes. He speaks of filial quiet and measured rites, of how a ruler keeps his steadiness by standing within songs older than himself. Each idea takes the shape of a daily habit, bowing to elders, tending graves, choosing words that fit like well-woven cloth. The students copy sayings on bamboo slips that rustle like a stand of reeds when lifted together. The slips slide into a lacquer box the color of fresh cinnabar, and the box waits near a low table where a kettle ticks softly. The lesson settles into the room. In another lane, a carpenter and his friends sit on rough stools as a man named Mo steps into the doorway and argues for universal care as a craft that all can learn. He speaks in examples that trade fancy for use. A good wall keeps rain off every sleeping child, not only the air. A good beam bears weight without carving dragons upon it. Songs of easy war find no welcome in his voice. He praises simple funerals and busy hands, and he draws a map where compassion travels in straight lines rather than circles that protect only one house. The listeners nod and pass him a bowl of tea that carries a fragrance like roasted chestnut. Beyond a pass where the wind smells of pine resin, an old archivist sits with a text so brief it feels like a sigh that never ends. 5,000 characters speak of softness and low places, of water that finds the sea by yielding to the slope. The book moves quietly from hand to hand. Some say one sage wrote it in a single life as he rode west on a patient ox. Others feel it grew like a bamboo grove, many shoots rising in seasons that forgot their names. The lines invite both views and refuse to choose. You close the slipcase and feel the truth rest without hurry. Out on the northern grass, a general strings a crossbow and tests the trigger with care. The bow clicks with a clear sound that carries across the training field. Infantry learn to stand in depth. Chariots lose their pride as horses meet stones and fall. A strategist writes that the highest skill is to win without stretching the bowstring at all, and his book moves like a quiet river through tents and magistrates' homes. Some believe a single master wrote each line as a mirror for restless minds. Others sense a school of hands joining craft into a vessel that keeps its shape. You accept that the author's face remains behind a screen and that the advice still breathes. In the western state that keeps one foot in mountains and one in river flats, a minister proposes laws that count harvests and reward service more than birth. He clears idle ranks like weeds from a dike and sets grain tallies as measures of honor. Villages stretch into neat lines and soldiers rise by merit. The change feels cold at first touch, and yet it turns fields busy and roads exact. Wooden tablets tally households. Inspectors move as steadily as the sun over a winter wall. Neighboring states watch and wonder how much firmness a people can bear in exchange for safety and full granaries. Chords compete in chimes and learning as well as in iron. In a southern tomb that holds the silence of deep water, a set of bronze bells sleeps until found again in a later age. When struck in proper order, the bells fill a hall with rain made of metal. The pitch is precise. The harmony springs from weight and careful cast. You picture the musicians whose sleeves brush the bell frames, and the courtiers who let their shoulders drop as the sound washed through them. A civilization grows not only by building walls and straight roads but also by tuning a room until each listener breathes more slowly. States raise levees and cut channels with names that taste of stone. Far in the west, a governor watches a river that will not submit to a single dam, and he designs a simple geometry of banks and islands that lets water divide its temper, turning floods into steady flow. Fields spread like a green quilt where gravel had baked. Grain finds its confidence again. On another plain, a long canal carries new harvests to garrisons and market towns. You walk along the embankment at dusk and feel how engineering can sing without words. Ideas sharpen in debate halls that smell of ink and oiled bamboo. The school of names turns language in the hand like a smooth pebble and shows how a title can bind or blur a rule. Physicians trade recipes for calm breath and bright eyes. Artists seek a line that joins mountain and river with a single brush tip. At night, musicians carry chin zithers to verandas and choose notes that fit the moonlight. The strings speak softly and leave space around each tone where thought can sit. Not all speech stays gentle. In the capital of a plain state, men with keen eyes describe a law that cuts past custom to the bone. They claim that people answer most reliably to clear reward and certain penalty. They set punishments in rows and remove the wiggle from judgment. The theory gleams with hardness, a tool polished until it holds no dust. It is simple to teach and hard to live under. Yet it gives fast harvest in order and in fear. You sense how a severe clarity can carry a realm to power and then ask it to pay a price that only time can name. Armies converge on a ridge of the north where limestone breaks the grass. The year counts 260 before the Common Era. For months the clash rises like storms that refuse to move on. When the noise passes at last, a terrible quiet spreads over the field of Changping. The wind lifts ash and dust and carries them toward orchards that soon drop fruit with no one left to harvest. The memory of this ending rides with every later treaty. It teaches through absence and keeps its voice low. Courts send diplomats with gifts of fine woven silk and chariots painted in black glaze. Hostages exchange homes and learn new accents. City walls grow higher and the outer earthwork begins to join into long ribbons that follow ridges like the backs of sleeping dragons. Traders carry salt and lacquer and fine blades between markets where dialects fold into one another. A child in a river town watches a scribe bend over a reed pen and thinks that power lives in the wrist as much as in the scabbard. Teachers keep speaking while soldiers march away. One says that the gentleman makes himself straight and the world slowly agrees. Another says that too much virtue spoken too loudly drains a room of air, and that the best rule hides its name by letting each person rest in skill and season. The conversation is warm and sometimes sharp. It writes itself into families and guilds and village councils long before it finds a throne to guide. You feel the country try on many coats at once and carry them all for a time. Night closes over training fields and lecture halls. Lanterns burn low. Ink dries on bamboo where a single character ends a line with the quiet strength of a stone set well into a wall. You think of the green disc on the altar and of the mask on the bronze and of the bells that hold a rainfall inside their curved metal. You think of the book that may be one voice or many. The age believes deeply in order and argues even more deeply about which path brings a heart to rest. The thread that began in loess and water holds steady while the map fills with towers and bright ideas. You fall asleep to the faint ring of bronze and to the sound of a river that still chooses the sea. You pass through a mountain gate where the road falls straight as a plumb line toward a capital of hard shine and measured breath. Ruts in the clay share one width, so wheels sing the same note. Milestones stand at even intervals like quiet sentries. At the gate a magistrate lifts a wooden tally that fits another kept by a soldier, and two halves meet with a dry click. The feeling of a single will spreads through courtyard and market and field until even the axle lengths agree. In the year 221 before the Common Era, a ruler from the western valleys takes a new name that sounds larger than a life. The first emperor sits with a face that tries not to show the weight on it. He calls for one script to bind the realm. The brush flows in small seal curves that float like reeds on water. Scribes learn to let their wrists settle into the same rhythm in every province. Words shorten their travel from one valley to the next. Bronze weights gleam in matched sets. The scale pan rises and falls with a fairness taught by law. Round coins with square hearts tap together in the sleeves of traders, and every tap says that markets can trust the road ahead. You stand beneath tall banners and a drum shakes the air. Armor takes lacquer like night captured on plates. Ranks move with a quiet that is not softness. County and commandery carry new meaning as the old patchwork of lordly lands gives way to districts that answer the center. A messenger rides out with an edict sealed in cinnabar. Another rider arrives with grain tallies bound by twine that smells of straw and warehouse dust. The realm looks inward and outward at once, holding to a core while its borders step to a firmer line. A traveler from the north places a rolled map on a table and traces a ridge where fort walls from many ages can be joined. Stone, tamped earth, timber, willow. The idea is simple as a seam in leather. Garrison by garrison the line settles along the backs of hills until towers speak to towers with flags and fires. The wall does not erase fear. It adds a pause before fear arrives. In that pause a sentry warms his hands over a brazier and listens to the wind move through arrow slits like a flute kept from full voice. Southward another vision unfolds in water and cut clay. Engineers walk a valley where two river families almost touch but refuse to join. With a patient geometry of channels and pound locks they coax a meeting. Boats loaded with millet and salt rise and fall and slide between waters that once ignored each other. The surface keeps a gloss like new lacquer. Under that gloss a quiet pull changes the reach of grain and command. You watch a barge turn easily into a branch that was not there a year before, and you feel how a measured plan can change the weight of a province. A memory drifts in from the court of an eastern king who once sent a man with a dagger folded inside a rolled map. The room held its breath as the blade flashed and a sleeve tore and blood found the floor. The old prince escaped with a cut and a vow, and the man with the dagger died before the pillars. The story still moves like a shadow behind the later triumph, a reminder that unity hardens in moments when breath and judgment must arrive together. The capital breathes lacquer and wet clay and the animal scent of many horses. In a low hall near the river, molds wait open like quiet mouths. Clay figures rise by thousands. Eyes receive paint that looks alive until air steals it again. When a hand rests on a warrior's shoulder, the clay gives a cool answer through the sleeve. Rows and rows stand waiting with topknots and plates and mustaches, each a little different, as if a wide army had stood still long enough to become earth. Far beneath a hill, a chamber waits in the dark with a ceiling painted like a sky and with a map of rivers that stories describe as flowing with a metal that glints even where no light reaches. The ground above keeps its grass. Instruments later sense a breath that hints at what may lie below. The room does not open. The silence is part of its power. Edicts travel to the coast where spray bites stone like salt teeth. The emperor climbs eastward peaks and leaves hard words cut into rock. He claims a renewal of heaven's favor and a mending of borders. Stelae hold his voice in characters that glimmer when rain washes their faces. A kestrel hangs in the sea wind. Far below, fishing boats move with the confidence of men who know the pull of tides as if it were a family habit. The law speaks with clarity that does not blink. Rewards arrive in coin and rank. Penalties arrive with speed that asks no favor. Villages accept the grip because harvests no longer fear the mischief of small lords and because roads answer orders like trained hounds. Yet a chill sits in courtyards at dusk. Households lower their voices when naming the men who write the punishments. The order tastes like strong medicine. It restores and it stings. In workshops, lettered men whisper lines from old songs and some lines begin to vanish. Fires eat bamboo slips and ash blurs a floor that once smelled only of ink. The chronicles of later years tell of scholars taken at night and fields turned to graves for stubborn minds, and yet the edges of this night remain unclear. Some records suggest a narrower flame, aimed at specific books and arguments, while storytellers lift the scale to legend so that the warning can keep its sharpness. You keep both pictures inside the same room and let the lamp stay low. The emperor does not stop moving. Tours cross rivers on long timber spans. Straight roads push over hills where the sun bakes the ruts until they look like old scars. In the carts, advisors watch his face and search for the moment when the jaw loosens or the brow lifts. They speak of immortality with careful care, of mountains where herbs grow in strict shade, of islands where guests do not age. Alchemists present bright pellets that glimmer like ground cinnabar. The taste is metallic and sweet at first. Months later, far from the capital, a royal carriage halts in heavy summer air. News travels home before the body. The reason for the last breath feels like a door left partly open in a corridor of many doors. After that silence, the machine continues out of habit. A second emperor sits in lacquer glow while a courtier with a thin smile places ink where it needs to be and removes those who raise thoughtful objections. The first architect of unity is led through a gate and does not return. Officers take orders they do not trust. Storehouses open too widely. Provinces sense hesitation and gather their own plans like men tucking valuables beneath their robes. The line on the hilltop loosens where it once held tight. The drumbeat falters in the square. You walk past a workshop where a craftsman still polishes weights to a perfect answers, and you feel how a country can love the shape of a good tool even while the hand that holds it trembles. You pass a school where a boy copies small seal characters with the same breath his father used, and yet his teacher has already learned a new brush style that sharpens the curve into a firmer bone. Order survives inside habit when thrones move too quickly. Evening brings the scent of river weed and fresh mud. In the west, the sky holds a band of copper light. A rider knocks at a gate and a guard takes a breath that tastes of dust and cold iron. The gate swings inward. You sense the map preparing to redraw itself again. The work of unifying has given a single chest to the land and has taught feet and wheels to move together. That lesson will outlive the hands that first enforced it. The thread continues under the ground like a canal that remembers where it wants to go. You step from a court that has grown brittle with fear into one that learns to breathe again. The roads do not forget the lesson of straightness. Wheel ruts still sing one note. The realm now chooses a gentler hand. Taxes ease like a tight belt loosened one notch. Punishments soften. Farmers return to fields they had watched from the hills. In winter kitchens, the steam of millet rises like a promise that stays in the house, and a steady faith returns to the rooms where elders keep tablets and lamps. A new capital spreads on a plain where two rivers meet. Walls of rammed earth hold the warmth of midday into evening. Markets open in rectangles that smell of soy, vinegar, and horse sweat. Coins with square hearts pass from palm to palm with a dry music. The script that once curved like vines now sharpens into strokes that look ready for duty. Astronomers raise a bronze armillary and watch the sky finish each circuit with the grace of a trained dancer. Court scholars tune a calendar so seed and harvest find the company of moon and season, and ritual steps in time with stars. You take the northwest road toward a corridor of gravel winds and low light. Relay posts wait a day's ride apart with fresh horses and hot water. Beacon towers show soot on their stones. In the distance, dunes keep the memory of every step taken since caravans learned that patience is a kind of armor. At the edge of the corridor, an officer reads an edict that names the western regions as neighbors to greet, not only borders to fear. The tone is firm and also curious. Garrison drums are quieter than before. An envoy leaves the capital with a knot of riders and a seal that rests in his palm. Seasons turn while he is gone. Some say he crosses mountains that bite the sky and valleys lined with vines and clear streams. Some say he spends long years under watch in camps where round tents move with the horizon and returns with steppe wind woven into his sleeves. He speaks of tribes at odds and of a people who drink from copper cups and care for horses that run as if fire lived in their lungs. His words open a door in the mind of the court, and the door does not close. Garrisons anchor the hexi with tamped earth and timber. A traveler moving west counts the days by wells and small shrines where passers-by leave a coin and a bow. In courtyards you hear unfamiliar laughter braided with familiar proverbs. Camels kneel while bales are cinched with ropes that smell of grease and salt. Silk rides on their backs with bamboo, lacquered boxes, and letters sealed with a neat square stamp. From the other side come goatskins of wine, blue glass that cools the eye, and mirrors that shine with a northern light. A narrow valley fills with layered tracks, each one a line of trust. You enter Dunhuang at dusk when the cliff faces hold the last sun. A painter rakes wet pigment across plaster and turns a cavern into a sky of quiet guardians. Travelers leave inknotes under hostile verandas that creak in the evening breeze. A boy copies the characters and feels his wrist learn a new patience. Farther along the ridge, a courier climbs a tower and lifts a flame. One fire becomes a string of small dawns that travels through the night without speech. Roads and watchlights practice the art of breathing together. Soldiers on the steppe harden to a life of sudden movement. The grass rolls away like a green sea. Winter bites like copper on the tongue. Alliances are written in silk and grain. Marriages are arranged to smooth a season. When peace breaks, quiet-eyed generals ride from the passes. They move with a knowledge of wind and distance learned by watching the dust of hooves on the horizon. Names like Wei and Huo enter the humming songs of tents at night. Summer campaigns bring new lines on the map and mounds of spear shafts that reflect the sun like cane fields. Borders breathe with the steppe and the breath is never simple. South of the great river, a moist heat opens the pores. Ports taste the monsoon. Cinnamon and cassia ride carts inland. Rice glows in paddies that mirror a sky visited by slow herons. Families from the north settle among palms and bananas and teach their children to read the same classics under new constellations. A fleet pushes up a gulf that smells of salt and mangrove and places seals on wooden doors in towns that had listened until now only to the sea. The south folds into the realm with a lake's quiet strength. The air lifts a new sweetness into court kitchens and poems. In the palace, a chorus of bamboo slips gives way to a softer whisper. Pulp soaks in vats. A wooden mallet rises and falls. Fibers open their hands and take in water. A screen rises dripping and catches a thin layer that looks like moonlight given weight. The sheet dries against a warm wall until it can hold ink. A clerk named Kai presents a stack that feels lighter than tradition and steadier in the hand than silk. Some say modest workshops had made such sheets for generations without a name to carry them into history. Others keep the clerk as the figure who gave the craft its clean path. The room accepts both truths and lets the paper speak for itself. Teachers fill new classrooms with a confidence that tastes of spring water. The Imperial University gathers students in robes the color of earth and moss. They copy odes that bend the heart toward steadiness. They read chronicles that teach the difference between a strong hand and a cruel one. They study rites so that joy and sorrow both find a mirror to stand before. From these rooms, a service grows in which words can weigh like iron and a cool mind can carry a person farther than lineage. Merchants learn the price of risk. A caravan may return with bolts of wool dyed a blue the western sky seems to own. It may return with nothing but a notebook of sand and wind. Wine presses creak near the capital where grapes root in soils that once knew only millet. Women at court wear new stones with a yellow fire and listen to stories of a sea that lies beyond many deserts. A lutenist tries a round-backed instrument from the west and gives it local tunes until it sounds as if it has always lived here. A cook crushes pepper with cinnamon and watches guests fall quiet at the first breath of its warmth. In a wide hall, the salt and iron debate fills the air with careful sentences. Ministers argue whether the state should keep the mines and the foundries or return them to families who know the taste of soil and smoke. Each side claims the people as its first care. The voices remain measured and the tea never sloshes. The record of the talk reads like a river with many bends. You feel the maturity of a court that can weigh profit and virtue without letting either grow loud enough to drown the other. A scholar sets a bronze mirror near an open window. The surface is bright and shows patterns of cloud and thunder cast from an old mold. He tilts it until a shaft of sun draws a wheeling design onto the far wall. For a moment, a dragon seems to sweep there as if it were the breath of the room. A child watches and learns that light and craft speak to one another without need of names. That feeling enters poems that call mountains relatives and rivers old friends, and it enters histories that hold sorrow and duty in the same calm cup. You sleep one night in a courier station where the stable smells of hay and iron. Before dawn, a rider leaves with a leather tube of letters and a satchel of soft paper. He sits tall and lets the horse choose its best gait. By noon, he reaches a river and boards a flat boat that moves without complaint against the current. By dusk, he lays the satchel on a magistrate's table 200 li away. The road is not only a line on a map. It is a habit that lets trust move faster than worry. Toward the later years, an inventor listens to the sighs of the earth and makes a bronze vessel hung with dragons. When a distant stirring passes through the ground, a small ball falls into a metal mouth and tells the room which horizon has moved. Some say the tale grows larger than the device that remains and that the true instrument was more graceful than any drawing now can keep. You leave the image felt rather than fixed and let the idea rest like a pulse under the floor. Night falls on the western desert and stars hang low like cold fruit. A caravan's lead camel lifts and tests the air. Bells at the throat give a patient chime. Somewhere a reed pipe sends out a tune learned from a stranger. The sound drifts into the dry dark and finds a listener far east where a clerk turns a page that still smells faintly of water and pulp. Roads and silk and paper have opened a way for breath to travel between towns and steppes and seas. The realm feels larger and also more intimate, as if distant hands now share a single bowl. You wake to a pale bell over the Wei Valley and feel centuries change like a tide turning in sleep. The old Han roads are still there beneath your feet. New rulers come and go like passing weather. Provinces knit and unknit, yet the habit of staying holds. On a morning of clear air, you follow surveyors who sight along taut cords and begin a waterway that will join grain fields to hungry capitals. Barges drift through willow shade. Stone abutments learn the pull of current. The Grand Canal lengthens until north and south can feed each other without waiting for the sea. When its locks settle into steady use, kitchens far from harvest find rice at the door. Order returns with the sound of oars and the neat handwriting of tax clerks who count cargo without hurry. From this foundation, a new banner rises. In the year 618, a house called Tang takes the throne and sets its capital where a grid can hold a world. You enter Chang'an at dawn when market wards are just lifting their gates. Spice walks the air with horses and fresh ink. Street plans meet you with a calm geometry. Drummers signal the opening of trade. Shop screens slide back to reveal bolts of silk that drink the light. A flute from far mountains tries a phrase learned along the caravans. Robes of many colors move easily under cypress shade. You feel the realm decide that strength and welcome can live in the same room. The city keeps two hearts. One is the court that breathes through ceremony and careful files. The other is a scholar's quarter where voices gather around low tables to test poems for balance and surprise. You step into a courtyard where young officials scratch characters with a dry brush before wet ink commits them. The strokes find bones in air even before they find paper. Exams begin to carry lives from village schools to magistrate halls, and a sense grows that a clean mind and a steady wrist can open doors that blood alone once held. On festival nights, lanterns rise along the lanes as if the constellations have decided to walk among carpenters and cooks. Buddhism takes a wide seat at this table. Monks in travel-stained robes reach Chang'an and Luoyang with sandalwood beads and a quiet gaze. In translation halls, the air smells of paste and damp paper. Teams of scholars sit on woven mats and turn a river of Sanskrit into lines that wear Chinese clothing without losing their old pulse. You touch a brush and feel how a single word can choose among several homes before settling down. A pilgrim named Xuanzing returns in the year 645 with bundles of scriptures that look heavier than a single back should carry. He speaks of stone towers, mango groves, and learning that lives under banyan shade. His voice smooths the air like running water. A scribe begins a long work that will let those rivers speak in the capital's tone. Along the western rim you enter caves cut into cliff faces where images float like warm breath. Pigments fix robes in mineral blue and vermilion. Flying figures cross ceilings that curve like calm waves. A painter grinds malachite until his fingers are green. He sets a line at the corner of an eye and the gaze wakes. In another valley, stone giants keep their watch beside a river. Their lips hold a softness that daylight cannot thin. Craftsmen leave a tiny chisel mark where no pilgrim will see. The work is a prayer to attention itself. You sense that power here is measured as much by quiet scale as by bright armor. Tea steadies the day. In a hut near a bamboo grove, a man warms a pot and writes a book that treats leaves and water as fellow actors in an old play. He weighs springs for their temper and decides that snowmelt has a voice like silk. Bowls rise in silent circles, each rim a thin moon. The first sip brings a green clarity that comforts without calling for speech. Soon every road carries this comfort. A porter sets down his load and breathes steam with gratitude. A poet stares into a cup and finds a lake where thoughts settle like small boats at dusk. Poets become the weather of the age. You cross a bridge and hear a voice that tries the moonlight with quick words and bright leaps. Wine reddens the cheeks and makes courage for a metaphor that hunts joy like a hawk hunts wind. Somewhere else a thin-faced friend writes with a lower flame. He notes a ruined watchtower, a lean harvest, a family parted by war. His lines carry the ache of duty that cannot feed everyone it loves. Their friendship becomes a thread that listeners hold in the hand when wind turns cold. The two names meet in taverns and in village schools and refuse to leave the language. They teach that style can be a fate and that a fate can widen to include a country. Within the palace, power shifts with a stillness that breaks only at chosen moments. A woman of rare force rises step by steady step until the seals of rule lie within reach. Her reign fills registers and temple ledgers with acts of patronage that leave stone and ink to speak long after voices have fallen quiet. Some say her hand saves the order by giving it a spine when it might have bent. Some say the same hand writes fear in rooms where courage should have sat alone. The record keeps both tones and invites you to walk between them. The air around her figure remains charged even when centuries have cooled the parchment. The empire keeps its edges calm only for a time. Garrisons on the northeast frontier begin to gossip of a general whose charm warms tents faster than fire. Commands travel from the capital with the weight of habit. Grain ships continue to climb the canal. Officials still test candidates on oaths and law. Yet the rhythm under all this begins to stutter. In the year 755 a drumbeat rises that will not be called to heal. You sit in a watchtower and see dust moving like a low cloud across the plain. The news that arrives with it carries a severity that will strain the realm to the bone. Cities hold for a while. Families pack scrolls into lacquer boxes and move at night. Poems turn from orchids and moonlight to hunger and empty roads. When the wind quiets, nothing in the capital feels exactly the same again. Music rebuilds the breath. The pipa finds a home on a storyteller's lap and sends bright runs across the room. Drummers in market squares coax dancers into spirals that feel older than the silk they wear. In a workshop, a woodblock carver inks a flat board and presses paper to it with the heel of his palm. Letters lift clear and black onto the sheet. A few seasons later, a scroll leaves a cave with a date that fixes the work in time. It teaches that words can multiply without passing through a scribe's long night every time. The knowledge feels like cool rain on a field at the end of a dry month. You keep an ear for the things that never quite answer. In a narrow alley, a seamstress repeats a ballad of a consort whose beauty swayed a court and whose fate bends inside the story like a reed underwater. Some say she dies beneath a mulberry tree at the edge of a camp where defeat is too fresh to speak aloud. Others say a monk leads her west and that she lives out her days in a small house where the dawn comes through a single paper window. The song refuses to choose and gains its strength from the space between those endings. The city accepts the space and moves on. At twilight, you return to the South Market where vendors count coppers into neat stacks and a storyteller wraps up a tale with a bow. The air is a calm river of human sounds. Bells from a nearby monastery breathe a steady note. Over the roofs, the last redness fades to violet. The Tang world, for all its wounds, still inclines toward craft and thought and the soft reach of tea and verse. You sense how a civilization can glow brightest when it learns to hold beauty and sorrow in one cup without spilling either. The thread that began in loess and river water now runs through painted grottos, paper libraries, and streets so well laid that even silence knows where to walk. You enter Kaifeng at first light and feel a city that breathes in even time. Canals carry jade green water along brick banks. Vendors lift bamboo shutters. Wok fire catches and sends out a warm hiss that smells of scallion and sesame. A market crier taps a wooden clapper and the sound runs ahead of you like a small bird. Silk dealers unroll bolts that drink the sun. Paper shops hang fresh sheets by cords that give a faint music in the breeze. You walk a main ward laid out like a careful poem and sense that commerce here is a kind of ceremony. A commander named Zhao once took a throne and gathered the provinces under a name that sings. The year was far inside the 10th century. The realm chose to build inward rather than gallop outward. Armies shrank to a cleaner line. Granaries and exams received the strength that border camps used to drink. You pass a school gate where candidates rub ink with steady circles and let the paste darken the stone. Poetry and policy share the same breath. A proctor reads with a face that keeps its weather to itself. The thought settles that order can rest on brush and memory when the sword sleeps. South wind carries a scent of wet soil and river grass. In paddies near the great river, farmers plant a grain that ripens quickly and takes a second harvest without tiring the earth. Water gathers in mirrors between low dikes. Herons lift in slow strokes. Villages count seasons by blossom and flood and then count them again because the field has given more than expected. Kitchens store rice in rough jars and peace begins to taste like steam and clean bowls at twilight. In a courtyard not far from the palace, a potter lifts a celadon bowl to the window. The glaze has taken a gray-green that looks like river water at rest. Light sinks into it and returns as a soft breath. The rim is thin and precise and it feels like good manners in the hand. At another kiln, white clay gleams beneath a clear skin. A crackle spreads like frost on old glass, and the crackle is not a flaw but a music only the eye can hear. These modest perfections travel by barge and mule and teach distant tables to sit a little straighter. Streets grow busy after sundown. Night markets open with lamps hung like low stars. Storytellers tap a fan against the knee and begin tales that fit the length of a bowl of noodles. Puppet masters set up a screen and figures with bright eyes glide across it to the squeak of strings and the quiet song of a reed pipe. Tea houses pour pale liquor that smells faintly of wildflowers. A server sets down small dishes of sugared melon seeds and dried plum and boughs without hurry. You learn that a city can soothe with sound and light as well as feed. In a small workshop, a man named Bai sets clay into tiny prisms and cuts characters on their ends. He arranges them on an iron plate and brushes them with ink. Paper meets the surface and carries away words that came together like tiles in a steady hand. The idea is clear as well water. The tools rest on the table after the proof and wait for fame to follow. Some say the craft does not travel far because the brush holds a character with more grace than clay can promise. Others say the printer lacks patrons with the patience to make full sets for every book a school might ask for. The truth keeps its own counsel and sits quietly between habit and invention. Along the city wall, a mariner leans on a parapet and turns a spoon-shaped needle in a small case. The needle settles with one end pointing a little off true north. He nods as if greeting an old friend. Out on the coast, large hulls with stitched sails wait for the monsoon to turn. Crews sew charms into sleeves and tie knots that their fathers taught them. The ships carry silk and porcelain and fine paper outward and return with sandalwood, pearls, tin, and a music that finds new homes in inland streets. Navigation takes on a calmer mind because a piece of lodestone shows a path even when cloud keeps the sky a secret. At the frontier, a soldier holds a bamboo tube packed with powder ground from saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. Sparks enter like impatient insects and a breath of flame jumps forward with a sound that startles the horse even in daylight. Walls learn to sit farther from siege engines. Shields change shape. Recipes for smoke and roar pass from hand to hand and grow in confidence. This new heat stays in the realm of defense for a time and then begins to imagine longer reach. You feel craft learning to carry thunder in a jar. A painted scroll leaves a studio and travels to a collector who opens it like a private road. Mountains breathe out of ink as if the paper were their morning. Path and stream trade places in the eye until the viewer learns to walk without moving. Pines cling to rock with fingers that know what wind means. A fisherman's hut answers emptiness with a single thin wisp from its chimney. In another workshop, a city scene unfolds by the yard. Bridges bend like the backs of friendly animals. Porters lean into loads. A single dog finds shade under a cart. You follow the painter through wards and lanes and feel a whole world hold together with string and patience. A fashion rises in courtyards where dance and song entertain guests beneath lanterns. Small feet cross the floor within tight white bindings. The motion makes a delicate arc and a hush that some mistake for fragility. Years pass and the binding spreads from elite rooms to merchants' homes and then to quiet alleys where artisans live. Some trace the first impulse to a single court performance in an early palace. Others hear it beginning in private quarters where singers practiced after midnight. The origin hides in that narrow hallway where applause and secrecy share a wall. What endures is the way a beauty ideal can teach a household to bear pain as if it were a duty. The map shivers when riders from the northeast press hard against the plain. Kaifeng holds until one winter breaks its patience. In the year 1227 the city has long since fallen and years of rebuilding have also long since begun, yet the room still remembers an earlier shock. In the year 1127 banners enter through open gates. The palace empties overnight. A court flees south with archives bundled into carts. Along the river, people wake to a silence that feels like a room after a bowl has been dropped and swept away. The memory does not leave. It travels with families who follow the court to the lower Yangtze and begin again among willows and lake light. Hangzhou receives the new capital like a generous host. Hills lean close to water and the water keeps a mirror for every tree. The causeway across the West Lake gathers walkers at sunset. Boats move by arm-length strokes from men who grew up with oars for toys. Poets trade lines about mist and bridges and little rain. Merchants tally profits in quiet rooms and then go out to hear a storyteller make a map with his voice. Paper money appears beneath the hand like a promise written on air that officials agree to honor with salt and tax. Shopkeepers fold the notes with care as if they were petals. Scholars give the age a spine. They gather commentaries into clear rivers and let virtues speak with a new crisp tone. A teacher named Zhu arranges the classics like relatives in a family hall and gives each a place to sit. He looks at the world and says that pattern lives inside things as plainly as grain lives inside wood. Students write this thought into their own breath and carry it to exam halls where open windows let in the sound of sparrows and the smell of ink. The state answers by giving the schools larger rooms and more lamps. You end your day on a city bridge where lanterns paint red paths on the water. A monk crosses with a basket of tea bricks tied in twine. A girl warms her hands on a bowl of chestnuts. A print shop shutters its door. In the distance, a cargo junk lifts its mast and swings slowly into the main current. The song world keeps a light on for trade and thought and craft even while riders from the north keep the edges sharp. The thread that began in loess and river water now runs through schools and market streets and quiet bays that hold the moon like a coin on black silk. You cross a plain where winter grass rattles like thin paper and ride beneath banners that snap in a dry northern light. Ahead, a new capital rises on a grid that looks carved from the earth. Walls meet at right angles with a calm that feels deliberate. In the center, a palace breathes in long courtyards and sober halls. Grooms lead sturdy step horses past bronze basins where ice holds a dull shine. You enter through a gate and the air carries leather, juniper smoke, and the faint resin of fresh timbers. The old heart of the realm beats here under a new rhythm. A ruler sits with a gaze that keeps mountains and seacoast in the same quiet frame. He takes a dynastic name in the year 1271 and announces that the land will not live as fragments. Scribes prepare proclamations on smooth paper, the seal leaves its square impression, and couriers leave at a gallop along roads that lead to deserts, forests, and wet southern plains. The city around him carries two memories at once, tent circle and walled avenue, fire and felt and ceremony in silk. The blend gives the room a double steadiness. You walk along the avenue that holds the market for the northern court. Traders count bolts of cloth and weigh ingots on scales with arms so fine they seem to float. A clerk shows you currency that feels like the future in your palm. Fibers of mulberry and bark lie flattened into sheets and printed with careful black. The smell of ink is sharp as tea. The promise rests on a law that covers the realm like a net and on granaries that answer with grain when the note is brought home. The whisper of paper moves faster than silver on a hard road. In an office near the palace, a team of scholars calculates the sky. An engineer named Guo teaches the capital to keep time with the stars. He builds instruments that lift bronze circles toward clear nights, and he trims the calendar until seasons fit like joints in polished wood. He studies rivers with the same calm eye and cuts new channels so barges can climb toward the northern seat. Water learns a new path, and with it the granary learns reliability. You watch a lock fill and a boat rise until its hull rests level with the street where children play with tops. On the southern front, stone walls that once held against every ladder begin to answer new voices. At a city on the river, a siege stretches like a long winter. Machines appear that fling stones with a sudden grace that belongs to a different school. Some say engineers from as far as the west brought the craft and taught it without hesitation. The walls tremble. The quiet after the fall teaches that even long wisdom must learn new tools. Years later, a final fleet in a southern bay breaks and slips under water with the last banners of a court that had loved bridges and poems. The sea keeps the oars, and the north and south at last share one sky. You climb a pagoda that lifts a white body into air like a flame given a cool shape. Its ribs curve with a calm inherited from mountains. Craftsmen who learned in valleys beyond the Himalaya bring their hands to the capital and carve a language of lines that does not feel foreign once it stands in this light. Within the halls nearby, the chanting of monks fills the timber with a slow warmth. Images wear gilding that catches the afternoon sun. The ruler listens, and the court breathes a new devotion that sits beside the rites of earlier ages without asking them to leave. The highway of posts runs like a living nerve across the land. Wooden pillars mark stations where the next horse waits. Saddle and bridle hang ready. A ostler pours hot water into a shallow bowl so the rider can wash the cold from his fingers. Messages move with a speed that turns distances into the size of a long day. Caravans follow, and the Silk Road learns a richer meaning than thread and cloth. Saddlebags arrive smelling of pepper and incense. Cobalt pigment arrives like dusk in a jar, and Jingdezhen absorbs the blue into white bodies that ring like thin bells when tapped. Dragons and peonies spray across bowls that will cross oceans and sit in palaces that have never tasted rice steam. At night, the city listens to theater. A troupe sets up in a courtyard. The lead actor paints brows and eyes in a mirror held by a boy with quick hands. The drum begins with a low murmur, and a zither slides into a story that holds humor and grief in one cup. A doctor with sharp wit helps a patient who refuses to be helped. A courtesan keeps her dignity when the world refuses hers. A judge smiles slowly as guilt shows itself. The audience answers with laughter and long sighs. A writer named Guan shapes roles that fit the human face. The voices carry down alleys and leave lines in listener hearts that stay for years. In a quiet hall, a gentle man in plain silk draws bamboo in soft ink and writes that the spirit of the old house can live inside new pillars. He serves the court and keeps his scholar's spine. His name will soften across centuries like a stone in a river, and the strokes he leaves will teach students that style can reconcile loyalties without breaking either. His hand links the past to the present without making noise about the bridge. Scribes file records that divide the population into clear ledgers. Those who came from the tents hold a high weight. Men from western deserts and cities take posts that smell of spice and ink. People of the north and the river plains fill two ledgers that do not always rest easily on the same shelf. In the street, a child hears 4 accents before midday and learns to buy sesame cakes in all of them. The city keeps its balance by habit and by the promise that exams and service will still open doors, even as the hinges feel different. Ships gather on the eastern sea with hulls deep enough to frighten a pier. Soldiers coil rope, and monks bless the crews with simple words. The sails rise and the fleet moves into weather that takes a breath and turns hard. Storms arrive with the suddenness of a door slammed by an unseen hand. The wreckage that returns changes the room where plans are made. Some say the wind saved islands that could not have stood against so many prows. Others point to anchors and pilings and archers on wet beaches. The sea keeps its reasons and the court learns to listen. Travelers write about this capital and the roads that radiate from it. They describe black stones that pave avenues and stoves that burn coal so cooks do not cut every tree within a week. They tell of a city that eats well and rides well and keeps its files in order. Years later, readers enjoy the stories and wonder how close the writers came to the rooms they describe. The dust on the boots in those pages smells real. The numbers are sometimes too round. You hold uncertainty as you would a small stone in the pocket and keep the pleasure of the tale. On a terrace near a canal, a potter lifts a large jar and listens for a true note. He has added a blue that arrived in a caravan and watched it fuse into a sky that sits inside the glaze. A pair of cranes flies across the curve. The wings feel almost cool to the fingers. In another room, a printer rubs ink across a carved plank for a sutra and stacks pale sheets that will travel by cart and boat to monasteries and markets. Faith and craft share the same bench and show no need to quarrel. Evenings in the capital carry a steady wind. Falcons sit on wrists in the outer field and turn their heads with the precise grace of a blade being sheathed. In the inner city, mandarins leave audiences and step into courtyards where pines make a soft rain of needles. The ruler ages. Ministers come and go. Famine visits some provinces and the court moves grain to quiet the hunger. The cost of size shows itself in wagons and in ledgers. The realm stands tall, and yet it feels the sway that comes when a structure rises too quickly. You lie awake and feel the thread of the land pulled through a hand that came from the north. It holds. It also frays at the edges. The roads remain. The paper notes still change hands. The calendar stays true. The pagoda keeps its white calm above the roofs. Somewhere a designer sharpens a quill and dreams of a canal that will be widened. Somewhere a general thinks of the grass ringing with hooves and wonders how long a city can command a horizon it did not inherit. The night gives no end. You wake on a riverbank where willows comb the water and a red sun lifts through mist like a lacquer seal. Farmers bend over rows that gleam with dew. A new banner rises over the fields. In the year 1368, a peasant soldier turned monk turned commander takes a reign name that promises bright clarity. His capital begins at Nanjing, where walls of tamped earth and brick walk the ridges and a palace looks out over the broad river. Registers thicken with careful characters. Village compacts teach neighbors to settle quarrels with tea and elders instead of blades. Granaries breathe a cool promise into summer heat. The realm tightens its belt and then learns to breathe with purpose. You walk courts where vermilion pillars smell of resin and rule keeps a firm rhythm. Tax clerks unroll maps that show dikes and ditches like veins in a pale hand. Edicts favor the field and the plow. The brush writes that a farm left whole through the winter will plant with courage in the spring. Bells count hours for officers who rise before dawn to hear petitions from people who bow with dignity and speak with plain words. The mood is stern and also homely. Chickens cackle beyond the rear wall. A boy chases a white feather that keeps slipping from his fingers. The map turns north. A later emperor chooses Beijing and makes the choice feel inevitable. You cross a moat that holds the sky like still silk and pass under towers whose roof tiles catch light like fish scales. Courtyards open one after another until your breath slows to the pace of stone. Artisans fit brackets together so perfectly that joints look like thought turned into wood. The palace grows into a city that keeps the color of the sun on a winter afternoon. To the south, a circle of blue tile opens above empty grass. There, the ruler bows under the cold of January and asks that the year find harmony. Music is precise. Steps follow square and circle. Breath steams and then vanishes into clear air. North and west, mountains lean close to the plain. Their masons lift bricks by the tens of thousands. Old tamped earth receives a hard skin. Watchtowers rise where wind can be read like a script. Beacon heads wait for pine knots and oil. On a frozen dawn, a sentry warms his hands over a clay brazier and listens to the emptiness beyond the ridge. He knows that the wall is a vow rather than a shelter, and that vows work only as long as people keep them. Smoke lines will race from tower to tower when hooves grow into thunder on the horizon. For now, the only sound is the small crackle of resin. Far to the southeast, the shipyards hammer from early light until stars appear. Planks drink oil until they shine with a sober glow. Ropes twist on long frames. An admiral from Yunnan stands with calm shoulders and a gaze that holds the same patience as the river. In the summer of 1405, wakes tug hulls into the main channel and the fleet slides toward the sea with flags that carry dragons and bright script. You taste salt. The wind lifts and takes you with it. Monsoon paths teach the ships to arc across warm water toward Malacca and Ceylon and Calicut. Pepper breathes dark heat from sacks stacked like small hills. Porcelain clinks in crates with a cool sound. Silk sleeps in rolls that smell faintly of mulberry. Pilgrims place offerings before an image of the sea goddess, and the cabin fills with incense that wraps around the creak of timbers. Harbors learn new names. Aden gives a dry perfume of spice warehouses and camel sweat. Mogadishu carries a rhythm of drums at sundown and doors carved like lace. In one season, a tall animal steps down a gangplank and moves with a floating grace that makes onlookers whisper about a gentle creature from a land where rains are generous. The court later reads the movement as a sign that the earth smiles. Gifts return with the ships. Translators return with new ways of speaking. Maps return with islands drawn like stepping stones. In shipyards, carpenters argue about the measure of ribs and the true height of masts. Scribes leave numbers that do not agree, and ink dries on claims that stretch and shrink with pride. The sea keeps the exact dimensions behind its long breath, and a listener is left with a picture that fixes itself only in feeling. Years pass and the harbor quiets. Orders send crews home and timbers rest under woven mats. The yards that once measured hulls now measure coffers and repairs for river transports. Some say the court listens to the expense with a prudent ear. Some say court factions prefer ledgers to horizons. Others remember fires in the north and the need to keep grain and men closer to the granary. The decision sets the sails in shadow and leaves a flavor of endings that never explain themselves completely. You accept the hush and let the sea speak in memory. Fire returns to earth as porcelain. In kilns at Jingdezhen, a long dragon of fire runs up the hill. Pots glow like the inside of a peach. Cobalt that came along caravan paths melts into patterns of lotus and waves. When a bowl cools, it rings in the hand. Blue rides on white like cloud on snow. Carters load crates until wheels groan. The world beyond the straits and capes learns to set these bowls on tables that smell of butter and nutmeg and roast meat, yet the bowls still remember river light and tea steam. A painter in a kiln town signs the foot of a dish with a small name that the fire will blur. His brush lifts and the work is no longer his. Markets grow loud with silver. First, the ingots come along island routes from Japan. Later, a heavier stream finds its way from distant mountains where labor bites hard into the dark. Galleons cross an ocean that a Chinese pilot once mapped for men speaking a foreign tongue. The metal slips from hand to hand until scales in southern ports feel a new regular weight and tax records begin to reckon dues in silver instead of grain. A grand minister counts the realm's needs and gathers many small levies into a single measure that feels clean to the book and hard to the purse. The change simplifies and it bites. A farmer holds a string of broken coppers and wonders how to turn copper into white metal. Traders arrive at dusk with solutions and with prices. In Suzhou Gardens, the world turns inward to rooms of shade and water. Windows cut in shapes of clouds open onto bamboo that taps in wind. Lake stones rise with holes like the breath of centuries. A scholar pours tea and places a chin on polished wood. He lets a few notes reach the pond and settle on the surface like pale leaves. Princes travel through city lanes and make heroes out of outlaws, sages out of travelers, sorrows into tales that fit an evening. A monkey leaps across a page and carries laughter from kitchen to gatehouse. A strategist raises a fan and turns a battle with a folded gesture. The press pulls ink from carved wood and gives a quiet immortality to voices that once lived only in taverns and temple fairs. Within the palace corridors, the air thickens with incense and rumor. Workshops hum with gold leaf and vermilion. A few servants with quick access grow large in people's minds. They set up offices that send letters in every direction. Some households live under their glance and sleep lightly. In other rooms, an older law endures. Teachers bring boys to the classics and make them sit with still backs until the text sinks into bone. The two currents run side by side through halls that smell of lacquer and lamp oil. Weather sharpens. Harvests thin in years when cold comes early and does not leave. Locusts find fields that had always been safe. River dikes fail after a season of hurried repairs. Bandits learn boldness from hunger. Along the northern frontier, new riders gather under banners that lift like pale wings. The wall holds for a time and then needs a stronger voice than any single garrison can give. Generals send for grain and for the attention of a court that is far away behind multiple doors. Rivers between palace and pass slow answers that should have moved like arrows. You stand again on the ramparts west of the capital. The brick carries the last heat of day. The stones look as if they intend to last forever, and yet a small plant has pushed a root between two courses and found a home. Far below, the road curves toward villages where lamps already burn. A woman rinses rice in cold water and drains it with both hands. A boy watches the sky redden and tries to count how many swallows circle the gate. The century begins to tilt. The glow on the wall remains a calm color, and the wind keeps its clean sound in the arrow slits. The dream of order is still strong enough to be felt, and it asks for another season of patience. Night comes with a steady breath over the tiled roofs of Beijing. The palace sleeps in a wash of moonlight. Kilns far to the south cool and hold their soft thunder inside the bricks. The sea turns its black face toward the coast and waits. You lie with your palms open to the air and feel ships that no longer sail, coins that shine like rain in lamplight, fields that wait for the right measure of water, towers that watch an empty horizon. The old vow of careful rule has wrapped itself again around a vast land, and the thread hums under your head like a taut string that still carries music. You wake to the sound of hooves on frost and the slow flutter of cloth that has known many winds. In a pass where pines lean toward the plain, banners climb the morning air. Yellow, white, red, blue, and their bordered twins, each square of color holds a company that learned to move like a single limb. Riders sit easy in saddles that carry the shape of grasslands. Behind them walk men in quilted coats who speak a northern tongue with a dry music. The road leads toward a capital that will ask them to keep both speed and patience. The city opens like a fan. Red walls hold the winter light. Roof tiles keep the calm of glazed wheat. In the palace precinct, the steps rise in measured flights so that breath follows the thought of order. On a day when the plum blossoms are still tight, a young ruler takes the throne with elders near his shoulders and teachers at the ready. Later ages will say that the boy grows into a man who rides to borders and learns the smell of river mud, that he studies maps until lines of mountain and steppe become family faces. He wears both silks and furs and treats neither as costume. You walk a long court where bannermen receive grain and tea and arrow shafts. Their ledgers list horses and rations with care that does not waver. The 8 banners become more than regiments. They grow into streets and households, into schools, into a way of holding loyalty as if it were a bowl that must not tilt. In lanes beyond the wall, men shave the front of the head and braid the rest into a queue that touches the spine. Some accept the braid as a pledge that keeps peace. Others feel a tug that never fades. The braid becomes a mark that lives on both skin and mind. At the North Gate, merchants lay out furs that smell of cold trees and iron traps. In a counting house, a scribe copies a treaty line that meets a river and a ridge and a straight run of taiga. The year sits near the end of the 17th century. An envoy from the far forests shares a toast with a court officer beneath a felt canopy, and the border between two worlds receives its first agreed bones. You turn the cup and hear in the grain of the wood how a northern empire and a river-born empire learn to speak without shouting. The south learns a different sentence. A fleet launches from a coast that smells of salt and lychee. For years, a sea prince had held an island realm within reach of the mainland. Now a general raises a banner with a dragon new to these waters, and the island bows to the larger order. Markets fill with new goods. Temples receive new plaques. The strait takes on a quieter tone, and fishermen sleep with more confidence when clouds gather near the horizon. At night, you sit with a scholar who holds a brush as if it were a reed that grew in his own garden. He serves a ruler who likes to test his ministers with poems and questions that have more than one right answer. The scholar reads odes whose ink is still wet and then carries them to a hall where books rise wall-high and ladders lean at gentle angles. A project has begun that aims to gather the knowledge of centuries and copy it into sets that will live in several cities at once. Teams read and comment and sometimes whisper about lines that should stay in shadow. The compilation grows into a sea that calms and also drowns. You feel both gifts as the pages turn. A painter in a studio nearby grinds a stick of ink on a stone and rouses the smell of pine smoke. He lifts a soft brush and lets mountains take shape with strokes that stay pale near the ridge and deepen toward the foot. A stag stands at a pool. A crane steps with lifted heel. A pine roots into a crag the way a memory roots into a heart. The court favors jade carved like ripe melons in snuff bottles that hold tiny worlds under glass. Porcelain wears new pinks and greens that travel along caravans as powders and arrive as colors with a garden hush inside them. You ride west with a column that moves under a sky as large as an ancestral hall without walls. The ground opens into basins and salt lakes. Smoke from felt tents climbs in thin ropes. A campaign grows like winter, slow and then sudden. At the end of it, the steppe answers to the court, and the deserts of the far west take a new name that mentions new borders and new roads. Garrisons build earth ovens and learn to bake bread along with millet cakes. Monasteries in high valleys keep their bells and also receive a seal that confirms their place in the larger frame. The empire learns to carry many languages and faiths in one sleeve. Along the plateau where the air feels close to the sun, horse bells ring at monasteries that smell of buttered tea and sandalwood. A procession turns clockwise and prayer flags lift a soft tide of color. Envoys from the capital bow before an abbot who sits with the calm of a mountain stone. Titles pass between them. Gifts pass in both directions. Faith and rule agree on a shared horizon even when the path toward it keeps small stones underfoot. In gardens east of the city walls, lake water reflects pavilions that seem to float. Willows comb the surface so lightly that ripples look like silk brushed by a careful hand. A poet lays aside a chin and whispers that this is how a country rests. In those same gardens, a prince practices calligraphy while a minister notes expenses with a face that hides its thoughts. Not far away, artisans burn polished wires onto copper and pour colors into the thin cells until a bowl holds both geometry and cloud. Stories travel on winter evenings about the woman who reads the ruler's moods by the crease of an eye and about the minister whose ledgers grow fat while his words stay thin. Some rooms believe the stories entirely. Others hold their doubt with a dry smile. The truth sits behind screens and leaves only a scent of camphor. The age carries both gifts and weights, efficiency and fear, confidence and suspicion. Each household learns to navigate these currents with its own compass. A British embassy climbs the road one summer and enters the northern park when the reeds are tall. Boxes unpack into gleam and chiming. The visitors bring clocks that tick with proud precision, muskets with neat locks, glass that catches skylight and holds it like cold water. They make bows that feel careful and they ask for trade like a river that wants more banks. Courtiers explain with measured courtesy that the realm already contains what it needs. The farewell carries courtesy and distance in equal measure. Later listeners will hold the meeting as a sign for many things. Some will hear pride. Others will hear caution. The moment keeps both flavors and continues to taste different to different tongues. Cooks in alleys sort sweet potatoes and maize alongside sorghum and rice. New crops soften hunger in lean years and village counts grow like bamboo after rain. Silver still moves through markets and rolls in strings of coins across shop counters. A painter speaks quietly about a novel that follows a great house from summer to winter through gardens and debts and silkscreens and young love. He wonders whether the last chapters belong to the hand that began the tale or to a later kindness that tried to complete a life. Readers cry and argue and return to the first pages again. Scholars at tea turn the talk toward a question that will not stay still. Some describe this house on the throne as a river that has entered a broad delta and become Chinese at the center. Others say the river keeps several currents inside one bed and that the court guards a braided identity that never dissolves. You listen and let both visions sit in the same cup. The room accepts the uncertainty and refreshes the pot. Evening finds you in a hutong where courtyards share their smoke with the lane. A drumbeat from the theater reaches your ear and the singer lifts a long note that balances sorrow with strength. Children chase a top that hums on the paving stones. Snow begins in flakes large enough to see their tiny ribs. The red of the walls deepens. Lanterns open. The empire stands at ease on a wide plain of its own making. Borders held by posts and treaties. Libraries heavy with copied wisdom. Markets fluent in silver and tea and porcelain. You feel a hush gather before a kind of weather that no farmer can predict. The night keeps its breath even and steady, and you lie within it knowing that the thread still holds, though the pull upon it begins to change. You wake to the sound of hooves on frost and the slow flutter of cloth that has known many winds. In a pass where pines lean toward the plain, banners climb the morning air. Yellow, white, red, blue, and their bordered twins, each square of color holds a company that learned to move like a single limb. Riders sit easy in saddles that carry the shape of grasslands. Behind them walk men in quilted coats who speak a northern tongue with a dry music. The road leads toward a capital that will ask them to keep both speed and patience. The city opens like a fan. Red walls hold the winter light. Roof tiles keep the calm of glazed wheat. In the palace precinct, the steps rise in measured flights so that breath follows the thought of order. On a day when the plum blossoms are still tight, a young ruler takes the throne with elders near his shoulders and teachers at the ready. Later ages will say that the boy grows into a man who rides to borders and learns the smell of river mud, that he studies maps until lines of mountain and steppe become family faces. He wears both silks and furs and treats neither as costume. You walk a long court where bannermen receive grain and tea and arrow shafts. Their ledgers list horses and rations with care that does not waver. The 8 banners become more than regiments. They grow into streets and households, into schools, into a way of holding loyalty as if it were a bowl that must not tilt. In lanes beyond the wall, men shave the front of the head and braid the rest into a queue that touches the spine. Some accept the braid as a pledge that keeps peace. Others feel a tug that never fades. The braid becomes a mark that lives on both skin and mind. At the North Gate, merchants lay out furs that smell of cold trees and iron traps. In a counting house, a scribe copies a treaty line that meets a river and a ridge and a straight run of taiga. The year sits near the end of the 17th century. An envoy from the far forests shares a toast with a court officer beneath a felt canopy, and the border between 2 worlds receives its first agreed bones. You turn the cup and hear in the grain of the wood how a northern empire and a river-born empire learn to speak without shouting. The south learns a different sentence. A fleet launches from a coast that smells of salt and lychee. For years, a sea prince had held an island realm within reach of the mainland. Now a general raises a banner with a dragon new to these waters, and the island bows to the larger order. Markets fill with new goods. Temples receive new plaques. The strait takes on a quieter tone, and fishermen sleep with more confidence when clouds gather near the horizon. At night, you sit with a scholar who holds a brush as if it were a reed that grew in his own garden. He serves a ruler who likes to test his ministers with poems and questions that have more than one right answer. The scholar reads odes whose ink is still wet and then carries them to a hall where books rise wall-high and ladders lean at gentle angles. A project has begun that aims to gather the knowledge of centuries and copy it into sets that will live in several cities at once. Teams read and comment and sometimes whisper about lines that should stay in shadow. The compilation grows into a sea that calms and also drowns. You feel both gifts as the pages turn. A painter in a studio nearby grinds a stick of ink on a stone and rouses the smell of pine smoke. He lifts a soft brush and lets mountains take shape with strokes that stay pale near the ridge and deepen toward the foot. A stag stands at a pool. A crane steps with lifted heel. A pine roots into a crag the way a memory roots into a heart. The court favors jade carved like ripe melons and snuff bottles that hold tiny worlds under glass. Porcelain wears new pinks and greens that travel along caravans as powders and arrive as colors with a garden hush inside them. You ride west with a column that moves under a sky as large as an ancestral hall without walls. The ground opens into basins and salt lakes. Smoke from felt tents climbs in thin ropes. A campaign grows like winter, slow and then sudden. At the end of it, the steppe answers to the court, and the deserts of the far west take a new name that mentions new borders and new roads. Garrisons build earth ovens and learn to bake bread along with millet cakes. Monasteries in high valleys keep their bells and also receive a seal that confirms their place in the larger frame. The empire learns to carry many languages and faiths in one sleeve. Along the plateau where the air feels close to the sun, horse bells ring at monasteries that smell of buttered tea and sandalwood. A procession turns clockwise and prayer flags lift a soft tide of color. Envoys from the capital bow before an abbot who sits with the calm of a mountain stone. Titles pass between them. Gifts pass in both directions. Faith and rule agree on a shared horizon even when the path toward it keeps small stones underfoot. In gardens east of the city walls, lake water reflects pavilions that seem to float. Willows comb the surface so lightly that ripples look like silk brushed by a careful hand. A poet lays aside a chin and whispers that this is how a country rests. In those same gardens, a prince practices calligraphy while a minister notes expenses with a face that hides its thoughts. Not far away, artisans burn polished wires onto copper and pour colors into the thin cells until a bowl holds both geometry and cloud. Stories travel on winter evenings about the woman who reads the ruler's moods by the crease of an eye and about the minister whose ledgers grow fat while his words stay thin. Some rooms believe the stories entirely. Others hold their doubt with a dry smile. The truth sits behind screens and leaves only a scent of camphor. The age carries both gifts and weights, efficiency and fear, confidence and suspicion. Each household learns to navigate these currents with its own compass. A British embassy climbs the road one summer and enters the northern park when the reeds are tall. Boxes unpack into gleam and chiming. The visitors bring clocks that tick with proud precision, muskets with neat locks, glass that catches skylight and holds it like cold water. They make bows that feel careful, and they ask for trade like a river that wants more banks. Courtiers explain with measured courtesy that the realm already contains what it needs. The farewell carries courtesy and distance in equal measure. Later listeners will hold the meeting as a sign for many things. Some will hear pride. Others will hear caution. The moment keeps both flavors and continues to taste different to different tongues. Cooks in alleys sort sweet potatoes and maize alongside sorghum and rice. New crops soften hunger in lean years, and village counts grow like bamboo after rain. Silver still moves through markets and rolls in strings of coins across shop counters. A painter speaks quietly about a novel that follows a great house from summer to winter through gardens and debts and silkscreens and young love. He wonders whether the last chapters belong to the hand that began the tale or to a later kindness that tried to complete a life. Readers cry and argue and return to the first pages again. Scholars at tea turn the talk toward a question that will not stay still. Some describe this house on the throne as a river that has entered a broad delta and become Chinese at the center. Others say the river keeps several currents inside one bed and that the court guards a braided identity that never dissolves. You listen and let both visions sit in the same cup. The room accepts the uncertainty and refreshes the pot. Evening finds you in a hutong where courtyards share their smoke with the lane. A drumbeat from the theater reaches your ear and the singer lifts a long note that balances sorrow with strength. Children chase a top that hums on the paving stones. Snow begins in flakes large enough to see their tiny ribs. The red of the walls deepens. Lanterns open. The empire stands at ease on a wide plain of its own making. Borders held by posts and treaties. Libraries heavy with copied wisdom. Markets fluent in silver and tea and porcelain. You feel a hush gather before a kind of weather that no farmer can predict. The night keeps its breath even and steady, and you lie within it knowing that the thread still holds, though the pull upon it begins to change. You ride in a hard-backed carriage that hums along rails laid through wheat and river. The car smells of coal smoke and dried tangerine peel. Soldiers doze with rifles upright between their knees. A student leans against the window and traces characters in the fog his breath leaves on the glass. News has run ahead of the train. The year sits at the turn after the old century. In a city of lakes, a garrison rises at night and the sound of a bugle opens the dawn. Signal fires answer across walls. You feel a hinge turn. The oath of a dynasty loosens its knot. Within months, the dragon throne is wrapped in silk and handed to a child who will no longer sit upon it. On a winter day in 1912, the abdication seal meets the paper, and a republic begins as if a bell had been struck in fog. Flags change as quickly as weather. The 5 colored stripes lift above railway stations and magistrate courtyards. On a street of brick shop fronts, a doctor of sturdy patience reads a proclamation and accepts a provisional office that feels too light for the weight of his hopes. Far away, a general with careful eyes counts regiments and telegrams. He calls the ministers together in a hall that smells of ink and lamp oil. Promises are made with the smoothness of oiled wood. Soon a new uniform sits in the presidential chair. The first dream already begins to share the room with compromise. You pass a bookstall that stacks thin journals like fresh cakes. Covers glow in cinnabar and ink black. A title speaks of youth and of a new tone in speech. Essays praise plain words that carry meaning without bowing to antique flourishes. A teacher at the university writes that writing should sound like the street on a good day. A story appears about a man who believes everyone around him has learned to eat human flesh. The tale is short. The chill it leaves lasts much longer. In seminar rooms, students argue about science and democracy while the steam from their cups rises in steady threads. The train pulls into a station where banners list wrongs done to a nation that has eaten salt and rice in peace for centuries. Crowds gather with a fever that feels like the sun standing close in May. They shout for dignity. They tear down a sign that represents a treaty they cannot stomach. Police hold the line and then lose the line. The next morning, classrooms sit half empty and printers cannot rest. You hear poems written on scraps of paper and pasted to gates. The nation discovers a voice that does not ask leave to speak. South of the river, uniforms cluster in a barracks yard where cadets practice the clean turn of a company on gravel. A commander teaches that a country needs both virtue and force and that the two must move in step like left and right legs. A party assembles in a southern city and invites allies who share the hunger for a clean country. For a time, the handshake holds. Guides from far away share maps for organization. Outside the classrooms, the harbor smells of diesel and fish. The academy sends out officers with eyes that read both terrain and town. The carriage moves again and the countryside opens into a patchwork of loyalties. A general wears silk under mail and keeps his rifle near the tea tray. Another general speaks softly and owns 3 lines of railway and a mint. Farmers kneel to plant and listen for news about whose seal stamps the tax receipt this month. In winter, drums at a temple keep a rhythm that reminds everyone of something steadier than politics. In spring, a bridge of pale stone receives the steps of conscripts who look back toward kitchens where steam would have risen from rice by now. You climb to a ridge that looks down on a city at the edge of a great lake. Columns of men move like patient rivers toward it. Trumpets rise and fall. A leader from the south sends forces north and the map begins to change its color along old postal routes. The campaign is named for the direction it travels. By the time summer turns into autumn, trains carry different flags into the capital. A city of stone walls and plum blossoms receives a government that claims to be national rather than regional. The new order tries to knit its confidence into ministries and courts. In a lane by the river, a union hall writes rules that promise fair hours and clean dormitories. Across the water, a cotton mill whistles at dawn and the doors open like a single mouth. For a brief time, the city seems to sing with one voice. Soon after, gunfire answers the song and the streets learn a colder lesson. Trucks rattle past with men whose armbands have been chosen for loyalty. In the alleys, doors shut before dusk. People speak low. The city holds its breath and then pretends to breathe normally. You sense a split that will not close for a long while. Nanjing settles into its role with the measured pride of a house finally repaired after long storms. Plane trees shade boulevards. Ministries place signs in clear clerical script. Surveyors pace fields with rods that read height and distance. Engineers bolt steel bridges across broad water. A spirit of order enters customs and courts. Banknotes wear neat seals. Schools teach civics and chemistry in the same day. Radios bring voices across hills to villages that once only knew the sound of temple bells and the cry of geese. You feel a decade concentrate on roads, currency, treaties, and classrooms, as if the country were finally allowed a breath between blows. Shanghai moves like a bright fish in fast water. Jazz leans from open windows at dusk. Cheongsams cut in new lines shine as their wearers cross the floor of dance halls with an ease that seems to borrow from the river's own glide. Film studios paint light onto reels that click in the dark. A detective in a felt hat moves through smoke and neon, and an actress lifts her chin like a small victory over time. Outside these rooms, a rickshaw bell rings for a fare and a spice vendor fans charcoal under skewers that scent the lane with cumin and chili. The city holds many rooms at once and all of them feel real. Yet the ground keeps a tremor. In the northeast, a railway runs through frost and reed beds to a port that smells of tar and fish. One night, a small blast breaks a section of track. Reports multiply with the speed of crows leaving a field at once. A new flag rises over a region that had long paid its taxes to the south. A throne is set for a figurehead who accepts the crown with eyes that seem to be looking somewhere else. Farmers harvest soy that travels to mills under a different law. The quiet between shots lasts shorter each season. You sit with a historian over tea that has gone cold. He speaks of lines that fold over lines. He mentions a politician cut down at a station before he could install the cabinet he had promised, and how the motive remains a room with more doors than witnesses. He tells of journals that opened a window to the vernacular and of cabinets that were closed again by the same hands that helped open them. He says the story of this era can be written as progress, or as a carousel, or as a long corridor with lamps that flicker for a moment and then steady again. You do not press for a single shape. You let the images stand together. Night takes the rail yard and leaves only the warmth of sleeping locomotives. Coal cools with a soft tick. Farther down the track, a guard swings a lantern and the circle of light moves like a small moon at shoulder height. In a third-class car, a mother loosens the scarf at her child's throat and hums the tune of a folk song learned from her grandfather. The Republic remains an idea that many mouths pronounce differently. The warlords keep their tents near the tracks even when they wear silk in city halls. The dream breathes through printing houses and classrooms and barracks, and also through kitchens where the rice finally boils on time. By dawn, you find yourself on the platform again. The signboard lists departures to cities whose names crowd the page. The air smells of steam and damp wood. A long whistle calls the morning to order. You step aboard with a satchel that holds newspapers, a few letters, and a small amulet cut from pale jade. The carriage moves and the country moves with it, pulled by iron and by hope and by habits that outlast uniforms. The thread continues, now woven through rail lines and schoolrooms and party headquarters. It is strong enough to hold the weight of a future that has not yet chosen its exact face. You cross a wide square where loudspeakers hum and doves lift from a balustrade into pale autumn light. Flags rise like steadfast reeds. A long banner unfolds along the wind and the crowd answers with a sound that feels like a tide entering a new channel. The year is 1949. You move with the river of people through streets that hold the echo of boots and bicycles and drums. A new capital settles into its name. On gateways the red paint looks freshly dried. A proclamation meets air and becomes a daily measure for kitchens and schools and barracks. You feel the moment enter the stones and stay. Winter carries you north where a cold river smokes beneath iron bridges. Trains release steam that smells like steel and coal and breath. Volunteers gather in padded cotton and pin badges to their chests. Bugles call from the far bank. The night is blue with frost. Columns move toward the hills beyond the border, and the land learns a new word for sacrifice. Letters arrive months later, folded small and kept in boxes with tea leaves to hide the ache. In city lanes, people lower their heads when the postman passes and then lift them again because there are ration queues to keep and stoves to tend. Back in the villages, a different ceremony unfolds. A bell from the ancestral hall now hangs on a school porch. Field paths become meeting grounds where elders and youths stand shoulder to shoulder and read out names from slips that smell of ink. Land moves from old ledgers into new hands. Oxen are counted and divided. A girl who once carried water to a courtyard where she could not sit now signs for a strip of earth that will answer to her family name. At night, oil lamps throw thin light on faces that are still learning how to relax. Some houses hide tablets behind a quilt. Others place them on a high shelf and tell the young to bow with a smaller angle than before. Literacy rooms bloom like evening flowers. Chalk finds the feel of rough slate. Characters that once lived on bamboo and silk now fill copybooks with neat squares. Radio sets thrum with music and lessons and messages about grain and steel and clean wells. Marriage law enters the conversation of tea shops and courtyards and says that choice belongs to two people with equal voices. The words feel new in the mouth and heavy with hope. The city paints slogans in thick strokes, and the brush rhythm enters the body like a drumbeat that holds the march together. Collectives gather the fields into larger rooms. Work teams carry flags to the paddies in dawn mist. A brass gong calls the first swing of hoes. The year turns and the will to move faster tightens like a rope pulled through many hands. Backyard furnaces glow beside dates and persimmon trees. Scrap piles vanish into small mouths of fire. In the glow, iron melts like night made liquid and then hardens into lumps that cool with a dull color. Some lumps carry only promise and little use. Still, the work goes on because belief warms the yard and because every village wants to be first to meet the number chalked on the wall. Harvests begin to thin. Granaries lose their sound. The ground returns a smaller bowl at dusk. Stories move in whispers along canal banks. Some say rain abandoned the plain for 2 summers, that locusts came like gray cloth thrown over green. Some say tally keepers feared to write what they saw, that reports rose like incense and hid the path back to the field. Others trace the loss to a plan that asked the earth for more than bodies could give it. The truth walks in the space between numbers and memories, shifting weight as survivors speak in low rooms with windows that look on empty threshing floors. You stand in a lane at dusk and hear only a bucket lowered into a well and a soft rope against stone. From the mountains, a young medic arrives at a village with a shoulder bag of herbs and powders and a folded stethoscope that shines like a small moon. He checks the pulse of a child, shows a mother how to boil water with care, and writes a chart in simple script that anyone can read. He teaches the midwife to take account and to keep it. He sleeps in the schoolhouse under a map painted in sky blue and yellow. In the morning, he leaves on a mule track that smells of pine and wet earth. The room keeps the quiet of his hands after he has gone. The wind turns and brings news of signals that no longer match. Advisors from the far north board trains that pull away with slow confidence. Factories pause in mid-lesson while foremen sort manuals written in one alphabet and replaced by another. A new partner steps lightly through the door with porcelain smiles and measured gifts. Somewhere a half-finished machine sits under a tarpaulin and collects dust for a year. Somewhere else a small plant learns a new rhythm and begins to hum again. In streets and schools, people change portraits on the wall and continue with the day. Students pin large sheets to brick and speak to the city in tall characters. Drums and songs fill squares. Red armbands catch the sun. A little book with thin paper rests in many palms and rises in unison when a song reaches a high note. Trains carry young people to provinces they have never seen. Temple courtyards fall into silence. Museums shiver, then shudder, then open again in careful order. Teachers stand in hallways with faces that show both principle and fatigue. Family trunks are sorted by night. Some houses hide scrolls under planks. Others present them to committees that make stacks on tables smelling of paste and dust. A country rehearses purity at high volume and learns how hard it is to hold a tune for so long without breaking the voice. Opera changes its clothes. The stage holds soldiers and workers and farmers who sing with clear chests and quick steps. Gongs and fiddles keep their old breath while the stories dress in new colors. In alleys, children stage their own versions with cardboard swords and paper hats and sentences they heard from the loudspeaker in the morning. A woman patches a sleeve while mouthing a line about loyalty to the work unit. In a dormitory, a mechanic learns a ballad by heart and sings it to a friend during the night shift when the machines grow thoughtful. You spend a season in a mountain village. Terraces bend along the slopes in quiet arcs. Water falls through bamboo spouts with a sound that rests the mind. The sent-down youths teach calligraphy on rough wood desks and sand the splinters from edges so little hands will not catch. At dusk, the class recites a poem about rice shoots and sun and rain. When the room empties, you hear a boy practice a chord on a borrowed guitar until his fingers stop stinging. The tune carries a softness that does not show itself in public. An airplane crosses a line of cloud and brings visitors whose cameras blink like fireflies. Teacups of jasmine steam in a small room, and hands meet across a table that carries both ceremony and risk. Table tennis sets click in a nearby hall as if keeping time for the talk. Streets take in new words that taste of cola and satellite. Television screens grow common in district offices. The picture shows the world visiting and leaving. The moment introduces a new posture to the shoulders of the capital. The city allows itself a longer breath. The year 1976 arrives with weather that leans toward omen. In the north, a city under a coal-colored sky shudders before dawn. Buildings fold as if someone pinched the map. Sirens rise and fall until they have no energy left. People lift bricks with bare hands. Banners of mourning appear in windows like strips of quiet rain. Later that year, along a lake behind walls painted with the calm of old authority, white flowers gather in silence. Footsteps slow near the gates. A page turns in the capital without noise heavy enough to wake a child. You stand by the river that always chooses the sea. Boats pass with the same patience their fathers kept. On the bank, a market sells enamel bowls and canvas shoes and dried tangerine peel. The loudspeaker reads the grain price and then falls to a music that stretches like silk pulled slowly from a reel. In courtyard houses, pots bubble and lids clatter and the smell of scallion floats over tile. In factory towns, whistles blow at dawn and dusk and a row of bicycles lifts its pedals like a wave rolling down a pier. Night settles on tiled roofs and the city answers with a grainy glow. Starlight lies lightly on watchtowers. Crickets take the lanes. The long thread of the land has tightened through fervor and loosened through fatigue and then held again through the stubborn habit of staying. You sense a change beginning that does not yet have a name in shops or kitchens. Families fold quilts at daybreak and walk down alleys toward buses that breathe a thin white vapor into the morning. Radios in windows speak quietly about adjustment in 4 directions of care. The future stands just beyond the next gate, listening. You step into a winter meeting room where steam curls from teacups and a map of provinces hangs on a whitewashed wall. Elders sit with faces seasoned by long work. The door closes. A resolution moves from voice to paper. The date is December 1978 and the third plenum turns the country toward a simple promise that work should fill the bowl and that truth should be tested by results. You feel the air change as if a window had opened in a crowded carriage. In villages of the Y Plain, a headman loosens an old ledger string and writes new lines that give each household its share of field and duty. Contracts dry beneath a brick. Chickens step over the threshold and leave light marks in dust. By spring, furrows run straight from family hands. Grain stacks stand with the quiet pride of careful labor. Evening brings the clink of bowls and a first relaxed laugh in years. The habit receives a name and spreads until county walls feel like small fences in wide light. Coastal wind smells of salt and machine oil. Near the mouth of the Pearl River, a young crane lifts its arm above riprap. The year turns to 1980 and 4 towns receive permission to try a faster walk. Shenzhen begins with low sheds, rented rooms, and schematics pinned to plywood. Neon follows. Lorries bring reels of wire. Women in blue jackets solder beneath lamps that make a noon at midnight. Morning markets still sell congee and fried dough beside buckets of lilies. Old rhythm and new hurry share one street. Trains lengthen their reach. Township workshops hum behind orchard walls. Shoes and switches and simple radios step into crates that smell of pine. The phrase going out finds passports and the phrase bringing in finds tooling and patient instruction. In a tiled dormitory, a worker pins a school timetable above the bunk to keep a promise to his daughter. Wages travel by envelope, then by bank book, then by a quiet chime on a small screen that wakes like a firefly. You cross a spring square where banners ripple and students recite lines about law, honesty, and the clean air of public life. Workers bring lunches in enamel tins and listen with steady eyes. The months lean toward summer. The outcome leaves a silence that cools the throat. Streets empty and then fill again with bicycles headed to night shifts. Photo albums close and return to drawers. Books and shops recover their breath. The city resumes its work with caution and with a resolve that prefers results to speeches. Far south, a retired leader takes a winter train and speaks on factory floors that smell of cutting oil. The year is 1992. His words walk coastal streets like a fresh wind. Projects wake. The stockboard clicks like bamboo beads. A skyline begins to lift at a pace that teaches the eye a new scale. Bridges leap rivers. Ring roads clasp cities like ribbons. At dusk, construction lights pour into harbor water and turn it to molten brass. Booths rise at trade fairs that carry the odor of cardboard ink and warm plastic. Merchants talk in quick blends of dialect and English. A garment buyer touches a seam and nods. Engineers adjust a mold release and smile when the piece clears cleanly. Laptops enter offices where abacuses once made a friendly clatter. A web of small screens and fiber grows under pavement and across rooftops. In back alleys, a noodle stall keeps its steam soft and steady, and the cook still folds scallions into dough with unbroken grace. The door to the world opens wider. In 2001, the country joins the World Trade Organization and customs houses learn new speed. Containers stack like toy bricks along the shore. Forklifts beep. A harbor pilot guides a ship past buoys that wink green. Inland towns send sons and daughters outward along bus lines that cut new chalk across the map. The spring festival migration swells until stations hum like beehives under red lanterns. On night trains, people trade melon seeds, stories, and seat space while newborn hopes sleep on borrowed coats. You stand in a square of pale stone beneath 5 interlocked rings and watch a torch pour gold into night. Drums answer with a heartbeat many remember from childhood festivals. The summer of 2008 gives the capital a new face. Stadium bones shine. Volunteers guide strangers with gentle hands. That same year, a mountain valley shakes. Classrooms fall. Rescue teams dig with iron bars and bare fingers. The nation learns pride and grief in one season and keeps both without letting either grow small. White trains begin to write clean lines across farmland. Maps in ticket halls glow with threads of light. You board a car that hums rather than roars. Rice paddies flicker past like mirrors turned in a careful hand. In 2 hours, a journey that once ate a day arrives with the clock hardly moved. The rails teach a new sense of distance and make words like near and far adjust their edges. Phones slip into palms. A shopkeeper prints a square code and tapes it beside a brass bell. Payment arrives as a soft chime. A grandmother sends a red envelope to a grandson in a dormitory hundreds of li away and smiles at the tiny fireworks that bloom on her screen. Couriers in canvas jackets ring doorbells with gloved knuckles. Kitchens receive rice cookers and air fryers and quiet plugs that remember when soup should begin to simmer. A woman sells hand-drawn calendars from a bedroom desk and ships them to names she first meets as icons. Policy turns toward hills that had long been last in line. Cadres hike muddy tracks to count roofs and measure wells. Clinics receive new refrigerators that keep vaccines cold through the night. Villages that had watched their young leave hear motorcycles returning for holidays and sometimes for good. The map of poverty shrinks until the border is hard to find, and then the number that once weighed on speeches is announced as past. Some hear certainty in that sentence. Others keep stories about families who still look for sturdier footing. Both voices remain in the same room. Along old rivers, factories sweep their floors at the end of a shift and read meters that track smoke and discharge. Forest belts take root along dunes. In the south, a city trims soot from its sky and sees mountains that old paintings promised. Yet reservoirs taste of algae after a hot month, and a child coughs near a ring road at dusk. The balance between speed and breath asks for steady hands on the wheel. You feel the steering through schools that teach ecology beside algebra and through courtrooms that give clean water a voice of its own. Household papers still tie services to birthplaces even as people pour into coastal zones. Dormitories pack tight and then loosen when families qualify for larger rooms. In high towers, couples weigh a rule about births that once held hard lines and now relaxes by stages. In alleys, red lanterns hang for the new year, while beyond the ring road glass facades stream pixels that sell futures with perfect smiles. The city carries both rooms and neither feels imaginary. Maps on conference walls include lines that cross deserts and seas toward ports and railheads under foreign suns. Engineers step down where the wind tastes of gypsum and salt and raise pylons that carry wire toward new towns. Dockworkers guide cranes in harbors where the water holds a blue unknown to home rivers. The program that speaks of belts and roads turns distance into a conversation that stretches from quayside tea to far dunes. Scholars talk in quiet rooms about a spring that began with family fields and simple contracts, and about later years when patents, chips, and rockets stand where bolts and shoes once stood. Some trace the roots to habits that lived before policy moved and say thrift, schooling, and village compacts kept the soil ready. Others keep the credit with rules and institutions and say clear ink on firm paper explains the harvest. The table holds both lines of thought and the teapot is refilled without hurry. Night on the coast smells of brine, diesel, and rain. Cranes rest with booms raised like quiet herons. Far inland, a temple bell keeps its round note above tiled roofs. In a high room over a factory floor, a woman studies for a certificate while her child sleeps beside a puzzle half finished. The window shows a skyline of lights and cranes and the faint arch of an old stone bridge that endured by being useful long after fashion changed. The country moves forward with a measured step and a long breath. Memory walks beside it and asks to be heard as new mornings arrive. You stand in a hushed gallery where glass holds moon-colored jade and bronze that remembers fire. A silk banner hangs with beasts that once guarded a gate no longer marked on maps. Footsteps soften on pale stone. Outside, neon braids along a ring road and the whir of a bicycle shares the lane with a whispering bus. Between glass and light, the country shows both faces at once. You move slowly, as if the room itself were breathing. Names carved in dark stone line the wall of a memorial. A bell gives a single round note that seems to travel through years rather than air. You step back into the night and a city opens like a lacquer box. Food stalls steam. A grandmother sells candied haw with a pride that feels older than the street. Young faces glow above phone screens where poems and payments ride the same pulses. A delivery rider ties a red thread to his mirror for luck and leans into the light. A high plane of concrete and steel serves as a runway for dreams that once lived only in books. The heaters at a launch site thrum in winter air. A column of light climbs and makes a new star for a few blinding breaths. Months later, far beyond clouds, a rover wakes on a red plain and tests its wheels with a patience that suits old scholars. Cameras turn, and rocks that never felt rain show their quiet. The report travels home and joins lullabies and market prices on the same screens. A child copies the rover's footprint next to his character practice and grins without sound. In summer, white stadium roofs rise like shells beside a canal polished by long oars. Skaters carve on clear ice where once only reeds knew the wind. Drums answer torches with a heartbeat that reaches farm courtyards and mine towns and fishing villages. Flags circle the track. The old habit of ceremony learns a new step and keeps its balance. Later, snow melts from hillside watchtowers and the bricks warm in the same sun that once dried millet. You ride a train whose windows hold the countryside like a slow ribbon. Poplars step along embankments. Solar panels face the light like fields of inkstones laid to dry. A village road passes beneath, lined with fresh plaster and new tile roofs whose ridgelines still remember older curves. A festival arrives. Paper cutouts redden windows. A lion dance turns a lane into a glittering river. Incense uncoils through temple doors and lays a friendly scent on winter coats. You taste osmanthus and tea and the clean bite of frost. Engineers in inland parks map circuits smaller than pepper grains. They work in rooms that sound like careful rain. Next door, A master of blue calico dips cloth in a vat the color of deep pond water. He lifts the fabric and the pattern climbs toward light. Apprentices learn the knots and the patience. Above their heads, a neon sign sells cloud services. The two crafts look at one another and feel related, joined by the same love of fitting parts to purpose. Shops lower metal screens at midnight. A courier rings a bell and sets a package at a door where a sprig of willow greets spring. A young couple set up a crib in a one-room apartment. Their elders bring bowls of long-life noodles and a sprig of lucky bamboo for the window. In a nearby park, lines of retirees move with a slowness that gives strength rather than steals it. Palms turn, heels pivot, breath steadies. The sound of the morning radio floats across ginkgo shade and finds a sparrow. The map grows outward again in lines that cross deserts and oceans. Ports wake under foreign suns. A steel pylon takes root where a caravan once rested. Railcars loaded with grain and machine parts answer to numbers that speak two languages. A surveyor rests his theodolite, drinks from a metal cup, and thinks about a pond beside his grandparents' house where lotus leaves lifted the heat of July from his small shoulders. The path between those waters asks for both courage and care. A river city in the center knows the taste of lockdown and empty streets. Windows fill with paper blossoms and warm lamps while the air clears to a silence that feels almost like snow. The gate opens again and people step out with a tenderness for ordinary things. A bowl of noodles that would once be slurped without thought now feels like a holiday. A nurse unties her mask and drinks water that no longer tastes of cloth. The year keeps moving and leaves layers that anyone can sense when the evening grows still. Some say the family altar grows smaller as apartments rise higher and screens become windows to everything. They say the spirit tablet now stands in the heart rather than on the lintel. Others say the grain of the old virtues threads the new rooms and teaches the phones to act like doorways rather than walls. You hear both views in tea houses and on subways and in messages sent late at night. The country carries the conversation without hurry. University courtyards smell of plane trees and rain on brick. Students read lines that once felt heavy and now feel like home. They write code with the same wrist they use for brush practice. A professor explains that human craft is the great constant, whether in chipped stone, silk thread, or algorithms. Down the hill, a factory replaces a dusty motor with a quiet one that sips rather than gulps. A painter sets out cinnabar and malachite and paints cranes over a skyline. The eye that learned mountains can also learn towers. The sea stays busy even on quiet days. Crews coil lines. Nets rise with silver flashes. A young skipper checks a compass, glances at a screen that shows currents like ghosts, and then looks up to the stars that once taught his grandfather the same lesson. In the village behind the breakwater, grandparents keep a courtyard citrus alive through a short winter. They tie red paper to the tree at New Year and say the fruit shines like lanterns. Night lowers itself over museums and markets and research parks and lakeside pavilions. You walk past a wall where ivy has taken a careful hold. Candles bloom in a restaurant window. A child sleeps on a mother's shoulder as a train doors close with a soft breath. The lights of a tower cycle through colors and pause for a moment on a warm red that lives somewhere between old lacquer and a modern diode. The road ahead asks for wisdom that listens. Some minds believe the center of gravity must move toward ideas and light and balance, that a civilization grows taller by becoming gentler. Others believe the spine is built from hard tools, clean files, and the will to hold a line. The land contains both instincts. It has done so before. It keeps them in tension until a pattern appears. You return to the gallery where the night began. The bronze still remembers the hand. The jade still keeps the rivers cool. Outside, the city quiets. You tuck the thread of the journey into your sleeve. It hums like a fine string on a well-tuned chin. You step into the air that smells of rain and iron and steamed rice. The future waits with an ancient patience. It walks beside you like a friend who has known your family for a very long time. Night settles over roofs and fields and courtyards. Street lamps soften to a pale honey and the last bicycle rolls home with a gentle click that fades before the gate. Far away, rivers keep their old direction without asking for witness. Willow branches comb the dark water until the surface lies smooth as silk on a quiet table. In mountain villages, tea cools in wide cups and the breath of the house slows to match the steady hush outside. In cities, elevators sigh and rest, and pavilions in small parks fold their shadows like cranes sleeping beside a pond. You walk a lane where jasmine leans from a wall and remembers summer. A low lantern on a temple porch leaves a round glow that does not hurry. The bell has given its last note and the air keeps only the memory of it, as if sound had become a soft weight in the hand. Gardens that knew emperors and gardeners alike hold a darkness that feels welcoming. Stones keep their warmth a little longer and then release it to the night. Bamboo taps gently, and the rhythm settles into something older than worry. On a windowsill, a single bowl dries, thin as a leaf and honest about its work. Somewhere a grandmother pulls a quilt over a sleeping child and smiles at a dream she cannot see. Somewhere a student closes a book and lets words recede like footprints in a light snowfall. Somewhere a fisherman ties one last knot and breathes the clean salt of a tide that has turned toward morning. The land gathers these quiet tasks the way a sleeve gathers light rain, and holds them close until daybreak. Ancestral names rest in their frames, warmed by the faintest candle breath. You feel that warmth as a hand on your shoulder, steadying, kind, undemanding. The rooms of the past open into the rooms of the present without sound. The doors do not need to swing. They are already ajar, your steps slow, your eyelids grow heavy, the night grows generous and deep. And now, you may drift into dreams of history. End of script. Sweet dreams.